Greetings, travelers! Welcome back to Tales from the Enchanted Forest with your hosts, Fox and Sparrow.
Hiya, and Happy New Year, everybody! We have another exciting year of fairy tales and folklore ahead of us, and I can't wait to share it with you all.
We do hope that your year has got off to a great start, since we are about almost midway through January now, when this podcast episode comes out. So there's a lot to talk about, but we do have a little New Year kind of ish winter story for you today. So there are a few New Year's stories or folktales that I could find, but I became fixated on King Frost or Father Frost. I really wanted to see the origins of the character, his stories, and anything else I could really find to kind of build the background. However, this led me to the Snow Maiden. Now, I do have an entirely separate script typed up where I recounted the tale of Father Frost that kind of follows the good daughter, bad daughter trope, where King Frost rewards the good daughter for her gentle nature and punishes the bad daughter for being evil incarnate. However, instead of that, there is a different story I wanted to tell. Now, this Russian folktale has many different iterations, and the actual character of the Snow Maiden is thought to be a 19th century addition to the tales of Ded Moroz, a legendary figure traditionally known as Father Frost or Old Man Frost in Russia. He was associated with Christmas. However, after the Russian Revolution, his association with Christmas and Christianity was banned, and he became a New Year figure instead, along with his daughter or granddaughter, the Snow Maiden.
Interesting how a character can be banned from an association. Like, that just usually...
I think they stopped celebrating Christmas. So they were like, okay, no more Christmas, but we can reuse the figure somewhere else.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, like, if you ban something, that just ignites the fires for people like, well, I'm going to celebrate this harder.
I'm sure there were some secret Christmas parties somewhere in Russia during the Soviets.
You can't stop the joy of Christmas, it seems.
But if you thought that this tale gets even twistier, it does. And we're here to unravel it. So the Snow Maiden story is attributed to Alexander Afanasiev. But while researching, I found that his story differed from the King Frost stories that we know now. It was the tale written by Mikhail Makishnovich that resembles what we now consider the Snow Maiden story type. In his stories and other Snow Maiden story types, we have a childish couple creating a snow child or a snowman that comes to life and they lose her in some senseless way. In some versions, she jumps over a fire during a spring festival. In other stories, they tell her to bundle up before she goes out, but she gets caught by the sun and melts. But our version of the story comes from a folk play. As we always say, our stories come from all over, and they're all different versions of tropes or story types. So this play was written by someone named Alexander Ostrovsky, who could have been inspired by the earlier two writers, as well as some other unknown writers, other traditions or storytelling traditions, as well as Frédéric de la Motte Fouquet's fairy tale novella called Undine, which features a supernatural water spirit getting a human soul. And for anyone who wants a deep dive on the logistics of Ostrovsky's play, I highly, highly recommend Victoria Kononova's dissertation for the University of Wisconsin-Madison titled From Senseless Fancy to National Legend, which kind of tracks the history of the play, where the inspirations could have come from, including the ones we've mentioned here, as well as the later iterations in operas. So, despite that really long, lengthy introduction, and much ado, we have the play of the Snow Maiden. Long ago, Spring had a secret affair with Father Frost. From their union came a beautiful, fragile child known as the Snow Maiden. She had been born with a heart of pure ice, and her parents feared what would happen to her if it would ever thaw. However, they had some bigger problems to deal with. It soon came to pass that despite their best efforts, the sun god, Yarlo, heard of their affair and resolved to punish their child for her very existence. So great was his anger that the seasons in the land went amok and winters grew longer as he refused to bring sunshine on spring.
Aww.
There are many reasons that different versions say why he was upset. In the play, it just kind of says that he looked down on this union because it doesn't make sense, the opposites of spring and frost. In others, apparently Spring was his consort and then she was cheating on him, but we never know.
The scandal. How dare she? But also, like, opposites attract. He should know better.
Yes. Given the rise of the romantasy genre, we already know that that's the thing.
Yeah.
And also the Persephone myth and the Inanna myth, where you have darkness and good and spring and winter all coming together. So at first, Frost and Spring did their best to hide their daughter in the deep woods, where sunlight never reached them. The young girl soon grew into a maiden, and the fawns and foxes were her only companions. It was lonely, and soon she grew curious about life outside of the deep, dark woods. Eventually, she convinced her parents to let her hide amongst the mortals, and she promised profusely to never let her heart thaw or walk into direct sunlight. The only question remaining was to find a couple worthy of their daughter. It just so happened that in a town not far away, there was a woodcutter and his wife who had always longed for children but never had any of their own. On a cold, dreary day, they were in the woods cutting logs when the woodcutter suggested they make a snow child to amuse themselves. The couple rolled snow and laughed like they had when they were young, and soon there was a lovely maiden made of snow in front of them. The woodcutter looked over at his old wife, who was smiling sadly at the snow, and his heart grew tight with the thought of her being completely alone after his eventual passing, with no child to bring her comfort. Their deep sadness and desperate hearts sang out to Spring, who worked her magic in an instant. She secretly thawed out the snow until standing before the couple was her daughter, the daughter of Frost and Spring. The young maiden's eyes twinkled as she took in her adoptive parents. Speaking warmly, she told them not to be afraid and that she would be a dutiful and good daughter to them in their old age if they only took her in. Without questioning their blessings, the old couple rejoiced and took her cold hands in theirs as they brought her home to warm up in front of the fire.
Wait, hold on. Did these parents just essentially create Frosty the Snowman and just were like, yeah, we'll now take this child home? Like, this is what happens with Frosty.
That is kind of what the Snow Maiden trope seems to be about in some of the simpler stories, where the childless couple just makes a snow child and then it comes to life.
Oh my goodness. That puts a whole new twist on the Frosty story. What if that's actually the Snow Maiden, just a different version? I love that
It could
song.
be. I mean, it's not... I feel like there are tons of stories where people create things and then they come to life. I haven't really seen one about snow, but it could be that this is just a long tradition of people making things and they magic them into being.
Yeah, kind of like making a wish, more or less.
Even in the middle of a terrible winter, no house was as alive with warmth and love as the old couple's wooden hut. The Snow Maiden helped them with their chores, sat with them by the fire, and was as kind as she was beautiful. However, one thing did worry the couple. The Snow Maiden was not talkative, and although she smiled radiantly as she sat with them, her face was always pale, her hands were always cold, and she always kept a guarded heart. One day, almost 2 months after the Snow Maiden had entered their lives, the old woman sat her down and gently asked her why she was so shy. Did she not want to go out and find others her own age? Although they definitely adored her company, a young woman should also be around others. At first, the Snow Maiden replied that she was happy just being with them, but soon the carnival came to town, and the Snow Maiden could not let her fears hold her back any longer. After all, she had begged and pleaded to come live with the mortals, so she wanted to go and experience life as a mortal. Bundled up and making sure the clouds were firmly blocking the sun, the Snow Maiden made her way into town. Everyone had heard of the mysterious girl living with the childless woodcutter, but no one had ever glimpsed sight of her. To the Snow Maiden's delight, the first group she came across was led by the daughter of the richest man in the village, a beautiful young woman called Kupava. So renowned was her beauty that a rich merchant passing on his way to the capital had stopped for a meal and caught one sight of her before proposing on the spot. Kupava was warm, passionate, and full of life. So when she spotted the cold, shy Snow Maiden, she felt a little bit of pity and took her under her wing. No one could have foreseen that this friendship would be the start of a great scandal and tragedy for all involved.
Dun dun dun.
You see, with Kupava being spoken for, all the boys in the village quickly became infatuated with the mysterious Snow Maiden. However, each one quickly changed their mind when they realized how cold she was. Although she smiled brightly, danced beautifully, and was so nice to look upon, there was something detached and unfeeling about her. She guarded her heart so well that none felt love for her in turn. One fateful day, The day of Kupava and Misgir's engagement celebration, the newly returned Misgir spotted the soft, pale beauty that was a snow maiden, and his heart felt as if it had never been in love before. If you can see where this is going, you get 10 points. It was love at first sight, but during your own engagement ceremony. After that, it was as if Kupava had turned into a haggard crow before him. She was too heavy, too loud, too dark, too unpleasant. He found her passion annoying and longed for the quiet nature of the snow maiden. Throughout the night, the once happy couple quarreled until he declared that he could never marry Kupava and left. Heartbroken, Kupava expected to hear news of him leaving town for the capital, but to her disbelief, instead, she heard that the scoundrel hadn't left at all. Instead, rumors swirled that he had been spending time at the woodcutter's house with the snow maiden. Kupava grew bitter and angry, not just at her fickle former fiancé, but at the betrayal from the snow maiden, a girl that she had helped, unknowingly bringing the viper into her own home.
If you were like dating someone for a long time and then they met your friend and fell in love at first sight, like, how would you feel? Like, how would you take that with your friend and your fiance? Obviously, he's trash because he like abandons you. But how would you feel about her?
I feel like it just completely, like, you could not be friends with that person anymore.
Yeah.
Because it goes against all the rules of friendship. I do believe that some people take the girl code thing too far. But if you were dating someone that was your long-term partner and he met one of your friends that he supposedly never had met before and breaks up with you to be with her, if she had nothing to do with it and doesn't want to date him, that's perfectly fine. That's his own problem. Mm-hmm. Then he's the only one that's the bad guy in the situation. But if she dates him knowing he was your long-term partner, there's something just really gross about that, I think. Obviously, every relationship is different and every friendship is different. For me personally, I would not be okay with that. Given that I'm married, I'm perfectly fine. So, yeah. Unless it happens to my husband, which, knock on wood. But I feel like in that case, it's just, you can't really be friends with someone after they've ended up with someone that you've dated long term.
Yeah, that's fair.
There's just too much crossover, I think.
Yeah, too much like potential just bitterness there.
Bitterness, resentment, just awkwardness. Like, I feel like there's always going to be a little bit of resentment because you got broken up for the other girl, which is never a good feeling. But in this case, it was her engagement night, right? So she was literally going to get engaged with him and he broke up with her. So
that's pretty brutal.
I wouldn't blame the snow maiden in this situation because she had nothing to do with it. Yeah. But Misgir is on a list somewhere.
Yeah, because I was just feeling that at the moment. Like, she's done absolutely nothing at this point. How mad should she be at her? Like, obviously she could be a bit mad, but I was like, how mad on the scale are we talking here?
Well, I do think it's a common thing where women will blame other women for their husbands being wandering or stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So it is a real life kind of, not portrayal, but it is kind of realistic.
Yeah, that's fair.
Kupava stormed to the snow maiden's hut and threw out such insults and accusations that the woodcutter asked her very firmly to leave. Before she left, Kupava screamed that she would go to the Tsar and have the snow maiden tried for being a homewrecker and Misgir tried for being an adulterer. Kupava went to Tsar Berendi and begged him to intervene. Misgir had compromised her honor, thrown her aside, and refused to marry her, all because he had been bewitched by another. She detailed the appearance of the mysterious girl and was certain that something strange was happening. To add to her wounds, the snake had waited until her engagement party to seduce her disgusting fiancé. It was a very serious accusation to make at the time, so the Tsar had Misgir brought to him. The merchant readily admitted his crimes, but when the Tsar asked if Kupava would forgive him and still marry him, Misgir said he could never marry anyone aside from the snow maiden. To her credit, Kupava also added that she had nothing but scorn for the wretched man anyway. As his punishment, the Tsar declared that Misgir would be exiled and sent to live with the savage wolves and their savage hearts. Crestfallen, Misgir pleaded with the Tsar and asked if he just saw the snow maiden, then he would understand it all for himself.
It's a bold claim.
I mean, I am big credits to the Tsar for being like, yep, you're a bad person, straight to jail.
Yeah.
Or in this case, get out of my kingdom.
Yeah, get out. I guess there's just no backing out of that. But yeah, it's interesting. Homewrecker feels like a strong word when they were only just about to get engaged. They weren't even engaged at that point.
I think the assumption from her calling him out for compromising her means that stuff had happened beforehand that would, in the eyes of society, make her compromised.
Gotcha.
So I think it's a little bit more serious than just he broke an engagement, which in itself at the time was probably quite embarrassing to have an engagement broken up with you. Because even in England and all over Europe and other places, having a broken engagement kind of meant that there was something wrong with you at the time. And people had a really gross kind of way of calling women, spoiled goods and stuff like that. So I can 100% see why she would want some kind of punishment brought about him for doing that to her.
Yeah, because she's going to face consequences from society.
Mm-hmm. Even though she did absolutely nothing wrong.
Yes.
And she's, blameless in the situation. There's still going to be all those rumors about her, like, oh, what was wrong with her, that he broke up with her, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So the Tsar called the Snow Maiden to be brought to the castle. The envoys returned with the beautiful but quiet girl. It was an intimidating scene for her. The pale, silver-clad Snow Maiden was surrounded by nothing but vibrant colors and noise. The Tsar sat at the end of the room, the gems on his kaftan gleaming and glittering as he took in the young maiden in front of her. Surrounded by all the vibrancy, she looked even paler. He mused at her cold features and wondered at her otherworldness. He knew, or guessed, that she was not really from their world. The Tsar and his best scholars had spent decades trying to figure out the cause of the lingering winters and the shrinking springs. Crops had failed, famine had become widespread, and every part of his kingdom had tried to find a way to appease the sun god. Yet, in the end, it was a scorned lover and a pathetic man to bring him the answer to his problem. He did not know how, but he knew that this maiden had something to do with his people's problems. After some thought and consultation with his advisors, the Tsar declared that to appease the god, the Snow Maiden would have to give up her coldness and choose a suitor to thaw her icy heart. Having no idea how to love, the Snow Maiden tried to decline and said that she had never once felt love, not even for her parents, who she loved very much. No one made her heart flutter, she never waited breathlessly for anyone to come her way, and she never felt like laughing deliriously or kissing anyone. The Tsar grew even more convinced that the cause of the sun god's rage had to be this cold maiden and her unloving heart. He called for the most passionate of suitors to approach and try their hand at wooing her. From them, Lel, a young shepherd, was pushed forward, and Mizgir also begged for a chance. The Tsar accepted both and decreed that they would all go into the sacred woods tonight and spend the evening with sweet songs and dances. They would show the sun god how full of love and light they were. In later versions of this play, the dance that he organizes ends up being some kind of spring festival that they were going to have anyway. So it kind of ties into the overall theme of the spring and winter coming to an end, and spring typically being some kind of fertility festival. So you would have love and fertility to kind of bring on the spring.
That makes a little more sense than just sending her into the woods with these two random guys and be like, all right, learn love, have fun.
Well, they would all go into the sacred wood. So it's going to be all of the youth. It's going to be the people of the palace. They're basically going to have a festival of light of sorts. Kind of like during the winter solstice, we have the night of Yalda, which is in Persian. We have like this night where you have poetry and you light candles and you have pomegranates. It's to show, it's basically to stave off the darkest night. So the youth gathered that night, and Lel's remarkable song enchanted every single maiden. His song even touched the Snow Maiden's icy heart, and she yearned to feel a love as deep as the others. However, the Tsar was not entirely heartless, and he let Lel choose his bride from among the maidens. The young shepherd hesitated before the hopeful-looking Snow Maiden, but he was ultimately drawn to someone completely unexpected. He was drawn to Kupava's fiery passion. He stepped past the Snow Maiden and took Kupava's hand in his before taking her out to dance. Now, Kupava was as surprised as anyone else, but her eyes filled with tears of joy. By choosing her and loving her despite her ruin, the young shepherd had brought her honor back and saved her from a life of rumors, gossip, and misery. While the two kissed and looked at each other lovingly, the Snow Maiden watched and felt her heart harden painfully. She had never known love before, and she had lost it as soon as she had wished for it.
Aww.
Distraught, the Snow Maiden hid herself in the bushes and cried at her own inability to love as different couples began forming and pairing off. She felt so humiliated. The shepherd wanted someone who could love him, someone who was more handsome than her and could feel warm. She had to get away from it all and wandered aimlessly into the trees. As she did, Misgear emerged from behind her and seized her hand. With the young shepherd, Lel, choosing another bride, Misgear was confident that the Snow Maiden was his. However, to his disbelief, she snatched her hand away and told him to keep his jewels and riches to himself. She had no use for him, and even with the heart that wanted a little love, it still did not want his.
Aww.
She had no use for him, and even with the heart that only wanted a little love, it still did not want his. Don't awe him. We don't like him.
Sorry. I awed it, and then the second time you said it, I was like, oh, burn. That's actually a burn.
We don't like him. He needs to go straight to jail. He's a weirdo.
Okay, well, I thought we were about to get set up as this being the male lead that was leaving, and
it's doing that fantasy book thing where we're not supposed to like him, but then we do like him.
I thought that's what they were setting up, that we were supposed to like him. But no, we are sticking with the original thought of that this guy is a little scummy.
This last little bit is going to be very odd, so just stay with me, okay?
Okay. Am I supposed to like him or not? I don't know.
You'll see.
Okay.
So, instead of taking no for an answer, Misgear grabbed her again, proclaiming that she would be his. And then the story gets weirder. You see, as the Snow Maiden was struggling against this brute, a fawn appeared and grabbed Misgear, giving her time to escape. The fawn then turned into a dead tree and trapped Misgear underneath. When Misgear went to clamber out and pursue the Snow Maiden, the fawn cried for him just to wait a bit. Not heeding the warning, the merchant managed to escape and stumble after the Snow Maiden. Sighing profusely, the fawn turned himself into an apparition of the Snow Maiden and led the merchant on a wild goose chase through the woods. Meanwhile, the Snow Maiden was running through the trees and calling out for her mother. She begged and wept as she implored Spring to give her a heart like everyone else, to let her love or to let her die. Spring heard her daughter's cries and emerged from the trees, flowers sprouting on the ground where she stood. Her daughter cried, and as she did, Spring felt herself grow weaker in her resolve to protect her daughter from her own icy heart. She embraced the trembling girl and granted her wish, removing all the protections that she and Frost had placed on their daughter and allowing her heart to feel its own warmth. Spring kissed her daughter's forehead and warned her to hurry back home. She did not know what would happen to her daughter now, but warned her to keep hiding from the sun god. After one last look, Spring melted back away, and the Snow Maiden was left alone with her heart throbbing loudly in her chest. Just then, Misgear broke into the clearing and was surprised to see the Snow Maiden looking at him with warm, loving eyes and open arms. It was love at first sight for her, literally, and she wept tears of joy as she embraced him. She told him that she loved him and her heart was his, but he had to help hide her from the sun god for the rest of their days. Misgear readily agreed, and they raced back against dawn to get to the Tsar's feast. When they arrived at the great meadow where the feasting had been, the tired Tsar welcomed them warmly. Many couples had paired off during the celebration, and the Tsar rejoiced at a new fruitful spring that would emerge. Misgear let the Snow Maiden over, and they asked for his blessing. A bit warily, the Tsar confirmed that she had chosen Misgear of her own will and with her own heart. However, as the Snow Maiden proclaimed her love for Misgear, dawn suddenly broke. Rays of golden light flooded the sky, and one alit on the Snow Maiden. For a moment, the light seemed to dance on her skin and make her glow. In the blink of an eye, the rays of the sun claimed the Snow Maiden whose icy heart had now fully thawed. The audience watched in horror as nothing was left of the beautiful maiden, and Misgear, driven to madness, raged against the gods and threw himself off a cliff to follow the Snow Maiden into the afterlife. But all was not lost. The sun god was content at last, having destroyed the affair child of Spring and Frost, and he set the seasons right. So the people celebrated the peace of the seasons once more and the sacrifice of the Snow Maiden. The end.
What?
What a wildly unsatisfying story.
Yeah! Holy crap! What a turn!
So, the main premise of the story is that winter and spring do often come with sacrifices, especially those of women. If we look back to the stories of Persephone, where she's essentially sacrificed to spend 6 months in the underworld to be Hades' wife. We also have Inanna that we covered, I think, last year in November. And again, she has to sacrifice part of actually, Inanna never had to sacrifice anything because she got her husband and her sister-in-law to do it. But again, another sacrifice had to happen in order for the seasons to be put right.
Oh my. Can you call it a sacrifice, though, of the Snow Maiden? If, like, the only reason this became an issue because there was an affair, like, she didn't know she was sacrificing herself. Like, the villagers didn't know they were sacrificing her. She just kind of got caught and was killed, essentially.
I do think to some extent the villagers knew they were sacrificing her, because the Tsar does say, we must find you a husband, we must thaw your heart. They didn't know what would happen when they thawed her heart. So it could have been something dramatic. It could have been nothing at all. It could have just been that she needed to fall in love in order to break the curse. They didn't know what was going to happen, but to whatever end, they knew that she would have to give up a part of herself, whether that was her love, whether that was, her physical love in the way that Misgeir wanted, or her life in this case.
And then Misgeir just threw himself off a cliff.
Well, I'm not so sad about that, considering he was trying to force her, so he could go right off that cliff. If anything, I feel bad for her that he followed her into the afterlife. I hope that, like, a demigod has a different afterlife than regular people.
I think so. It's just so funny just to read that line. It's the equivalent of someone getting hit by a bus. It's like, It just happens so suddenly and out of nowhere, and it's so dramatic, and I'm just kind of here for it.
When this folk play first came out, it had a lot of bad reviews. It was called a play, a simple story about a stupid king and his stupid subjects, as one reviewer put it. Another called it a Western play dressed up as an old Russian tale. And when he compared the Faerie play to Shakespeare's Midsummer Night Dream. The bad reviews truly are spectacular, and I'll put some of them on the website. But people really, really hated this play, especially the Russians. They thought this had nothing to do with their culture, nothing to do with their heritage, nothing to do with their storytelling traditions. It was made up of a bunch of different stupid people. The king, the Tsar, was completely moronic. The spring festival didn't make any sense. The entire concept of the Snow Maiden was really offensive to some people. However, a few years later, Rimsky-Korsakov made an opera about it. And his opera, which was almost completely similar, like it was very, very similar to the play, it became a Russian cultural icon. So Ostrovsky wrote this play that was heavily ridiculed despite his, and to be fair, Ostrovsky was a playwright who did not write folk tales and fairy tales. He had some very serious plays. And so imagine that you are a Russian critic and you are watching Ostrovsky's plays, and he puts on these very critical plays. He puts on plays that have some kind of deep social meaning. And then all of a sudden, he comes out with this almost nonsensical fairy story. And it comes out around the same time as Shakespeare's fairy story. So you start to think, is he copying the popularity of Shakespeare? Is he copying a playwriting tradition that doesn't belong to Russia? Is he mocking Russian cultural heritage?
I think I feel like sometimes artists, and this is just a random guess, I feel like sometimes artists want to make something completely random so they can say, I was misunderstood in my own time, and this person just happened to be right about his random one being understood later. It was just
he was literally misunderstood in his own time. The opera, really famous. The music in the opera is gorgeous. Tchaikovsky wrote some of it. I think Tchaikovsky wrote some stuff that was very similar.
This is very fun. I'm glad we get to cover a folk play where we have reviews for it. Like, this is a very unique way to get the story.
Yes, but the reviews were not good. So I really need to make sure you understand that. The reviews were terrible. This man got booed off stage, metaphorically booed off stage, for trying something new and different than what people used to consider him the master of.
You guys just don't understand me, bro.
Yeah. And then someone else took his work and made a opera based on it, and it became a hit. And people were like, this is what Russian culture is about.
It's like, bro, I'm right here.
Mm-hmm. So it might have also been the timing. I mean, if you're writing something very similar to someone else and it's in the same kind of release period. So I think Shakespeare wrote The Midsummer Night's Dream, and then he wrote The Snow Maiden. And I guess if people had seen both and they saw Shakespeare's work, this one would not make very much sense. And so I could see why they would criticize this as a shadow of a copy. Whereas when the opera came out, it was new, and it was in the 1800s, I think, or the 1900s, and it was very different.
And people had probably also come accustomed to the story, and it kind of helps when you know story beats, then you can kind of romanticize it a bit. Like, oh yeah, but I know this story. Like, I know the beats, I know how it's going to play out.
It might have been one of those things where it worked better because everything doesn't make sense through the storytelling tradition, right? So not everything is a good play, but it could be a good novel, and not everything is a good novel, but it could be a good opera. So in this case, it almost seemed like the opera was the better the better mode, like the better format for this story, especially since he gave everyone specific motifs and different melodies, so you could tell who the folk people were, who the Snow Maiden was, and so that was very interesting to a lot of people. And it's kind of like, and I'll never stop talking about this, Epic, the musical, which follows the story of Odysseus. So Jorge Rivera Heron says something very similar, where he gives the different characters different melodies or motifs and stuff like that. So when you hear it, you know, oh, this is for Athena, or this is for Ares, or this is for Poseidon. So it's very easy to recognize the different sounds in the music itself and connect with the different characters. So I think if he did something similar, then it would make it easier for the audience to actually connect with characters as opposed to this whirlwind that we get with the play. And again, I will be linking one of the scripts on the website because it is very short and it doesn't make a lot of sense. So I had to use, I think, a couple different versions to try and put a story together that made sense.
No, and we appreciate it. And that's kind of one of the things we like doing here on this podcast is kind of piecing things together to make it make sense and that we can, in a way that we can enjoy the story.
But yes, I highly, highly recommend Victoria's dissertation for the University of Wisconsin because it does cover all of the reviews and you can kind of see how the reviews change and the scope of the reviews. And she does go into things like the costuming, who played what role, to see if that kind of had an impact on the really bad reviews versus the opera and seeing how the opera performed differently. Was it the different audience? Was it the time period? What was it that made the play literally go from a senseless fancy, as it was called, to a national legend?
National legend, national treasure. Just goes to show that your story could just be steps away from being remembered later on as a
someone else will rewrite it and make a better version of it.
Yes, and then you could be like, hey, but then also you get some credit in there, so I don't know how people feel about that, but it's very interesting to see how stories change and how cultures view stories differently over time.
So we still do have a lot of Snow Maiden stories, and that's usually the one where the Snow Maiden comes from basically a Frosty-esque beginning and ends up with the childless couple. So that's very popular. This one, I can see why it's not more popular, but this version of the story does exist as well. So it's always fun to show off some different versions of the same tale.
Yeah. And while not doing the exact same beats, there's something about this that does remind me of the bamboo cutter's daughter story. Mm-hmm. Definitely at the beginning, but also kind of like how the Snow Maiden's cold and there's that alien-like feeling with the bamboo cutter's daughter. It's just,
and then she ends up being the daughter of the moon or something like that. Yeah, 100%. I can see the relation now.
Yeah, and she pretty much just disappears at the end while she goes to live on the moon. It's just kind of this boink. and doesn't really end up with the love interest at the end.
Yeah, the emperor.
Or whoever. Yeah. You know, it's been a while. I gotta look at that story again.
It's just very much whiplash, I think.
Yeah. Man, it's 2025. We've been doing this for a while.
I know.
It's crazy. But I'm very excited for what we're going to do next. We got some big stories that we want to do this year and that I'm very excited about. So I think this is going to be a good year. I'm going to say it. It's going to be a fun year.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. And we'll be there with you throughout the year. So thank you, travelers, for listening.
As always, if you want to see this show summary or notes, then check out our website, talesfromenchantforest.com. If you want to hear more from us, then join us on Bluesky at From Enchanted or most other social media sites under our podcast name. However, if you are old school like Sparrow, you can email us at talesfromenchantforest@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your questions, comments, and suggestions as we plan our episodes out for the new year.
And remember, there's always a place for you in the Enchanted Forest.